تست تست مايك تست. عودة من جديد لكي نصل للهدف ونحقق الأثر. نحن بحاجة لخارطة واضحة لنطلع عليها جميعاً في جلسة حوارية يديرها سعادة الدكتور باسم المدني، أستاذ مساعد بقسم هندسة الحاسب بجامعة الملك فهد للبترول والمعادن، ومدير أكاديمية الفوزان لتطوير قيادات المؤسسات غير الربحية، ومتخصص في تطوير المعايير الوظيفية والمناهج للقطاع غير الربحي. دكتور باسم، إليك المنصة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. حياكم الله جميعا في هذه الفقرة التي ستكون إن شاء الله تعالى نحسبها درة التاج، بحيث نلخص جميع ما ذكر في هذا المنتدى الطيب المبارك. ومهمتي ستكون فيها تحدي كبير جدا لمواجهة العلماء والممارسين الخبراء أمامكم، لكن نسأل الله تعالى الإعانة. وأستميحكم عذرا للتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية نظرا لتسهيل الترجمة على الإخوة الزملاء المتحدثين، حتى لا يضطروا إلى تغيير السماعات بشكل متكرر، لأن الجلسة ستكون حوارية. I'm gonna talk in English إن شاء الله. And so you can enjoy listening and talking in English, and the translator will do a good job. But don't be so fast like me, because they can have their time to translate your input. Okay, so the overarching theme of this session gonna be the roadmap for social investment in Saudi Arabia under the vision of 2030, and what are the milestones and things to watch and make sure that we are doing correctly. Nowadays we are living a golden days basically under the leadership of King Salman, the custodian of the two Holy Mosques, and the new young leadership of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman with the 2030 vision, where we have actually a green field to start with. We don't have a complicated legacy system in place to correct, but we're gonna start basically fresh in the area of social good and social investment specifically. So I'm gonna divide the discussion today in two parts. The first part is gonna be directed to the regulators and influencers, including foundations. So the people basically putting the regulations in the sector and people injecting the money to the sector. And the second part gonna be for the NGOs and the individuals themselves. And with your input from different aspects, I think we're gonna enjoy talking about these two parts. Let me start with the roadmap and milestones for the regulators and influencers, mainly the foundations أو الجهات المانحة. And starting from different aspects. I think طيب, since you are on the right side, and as a young leader and a young social entrepreneur, what could be the roadmap and the role of youth in the social investment map in Saudi Arabia?
From the regulator side or from the NGO side?
Let's start with the regulatory side first.
Okay. So on the regulatory side, a couple of things when we're thinking about youth and developing youth. First and foremost, I would say, even though we have 2030 vision, as we're thinking about regulation, let's think beyond 2030. That's first and foremost. Because those who are youth today, 10 years from now, they're going to be very different people. We've all been, youth in our lives, and we're growing in our lives. We're very different people when we're 20, when we're 30, when we're 40. So solve a problem. This would be my first tip.
Excellent. We are talking about the regulatory bodies in the sector because most of the NGOs go where the funds are. So we also include the foundation because they are influencers, basically, in the directions and the strategies in the sector. So thank you very much. Then let me go to maybe Martin. Martin, you have a rich experience in designing the social services. So when we would like to start like a social investment, we always think about what are the product and services we really would like to invest in a kind of sustainable manner. What you can add to this, please? The question is how the roadmap for social investment could be from designing the social services aspect.
Well, yes. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for this hospitality. We feel so warmly welcome. I think that in order to answer, first this question, the most important thing is to teach the young people compassion and empathy. Young people have to be allowed to go safely into the social area and volunteer. So this is very important so that they understand how other people are suffering.
Exactly.
And second, with regards to your question, the most important thing is to understand what the need is. Do we know the needs of the Saudi people? We know what the government wants to do, but we do not know, for example, as we were talking during the break, how many people with special disabilities are there? And where are they? How many young people or people cannot hear? You don't know. So what you need to do is allow this information to flow up, or else you will have a crisis where the government is trying to do something, but the needs of the population are different. And as I mentioned yesterday in Chile, which is a beautiful country with a very powerful economy, the government saying, we are doing fine because the GNP per capita is growing. But the people are not GNP per capita.
Exactly.
So they have needs and the government did not understand. So it is very important to have an open communication, a safe communication, so that people can inform,
Excellent. I think this is a very good transition to the next point where we would like to talk about the ecosystem the regulatory bodies has to put in order to enable the social investment. And I think Farouk, and then I'll come back to Zoran on the ecosystem need, basically, in Saudi Arabia. Please. Yeah. Yes.
One of the earliest things we learned in our work was that you can't, or this work cannot succeed in isolation. Just like in business and investing, you can't have, if you don't have venture capital, you can't have late-stage private equity investing. Similarly, in the social sector, you need the ecosystem, the different building blocks to be there. From the youth being inspired, as Martin was saying, to proper training being available, to the regulatory structure being properly created. So for example, if foundations or not-for-profits are not allowed to invest. So for example, in our work in India, the regulations there don't allow you to raise philanthropy to invest. So impact investing is very difficult. You have to get all the money from overseas. Similarly, now in the US, they have changed the foundation laws, rules that foundations can invest part of their money into program-related investments. So they don't have to only invest in the stock market to get the maximum return. Between 5 to 10%, they can invest in impact investing also. So as Saudi Arabia is looking at the Vision 2030 and has the opportunity to look at lessons from around the world, adapt the best practices to their own needs, but make sure that regulations are made very thoughtfully, which encourage the whole ecosystem to develop, because it cannot work in isolation, the kind of work that we're talking about.
Exactly. Zoran, you shared with us a very interesting experience where you saw your country basically somehow damaged for a period of time and then launching up again and growing and developing in a very nice manner. So how do you see the regulations and the role of the foundations or the influencers in putting a roadmap, ideally, in your opinion, for the social investment?
Yeah, thank you. I think roadmaps are extremely important. So, for example, today, according to the World Economic Forum, the children entering elementary education, 65% of them will work in jobs after they finish university, which have not been invented yet. So what is it saying? It's saying that we are entering a time of unpredictability. So it's really, that's the one point. So we have to be flexible in what we are designing. And the second point is that what I've seen, two things in my country happening after the war is, one, we as foundations have made many mistakes. And let me give you a small example. There was a local municipality paid for an association of disabled to put in a copy station, copying documents in a building next to the municipality, with the good intention that they're going to subsidize these people to work because they have less capability, they cannot be as productive as other companies, so they would subsidize. They would give them space, and they would subsidize it a little bit. What they didn't take into consideration was that maybe 50 meters further, there was a small family business which was doing exactly the same. And what ended up being at the end is that the family business had to close down because they could not fight against competition, which was subsidized. But this organization was not as professional as they had to be, so they were also struggling making themselves sustainable. So good intentions don't always lead to good results. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to be very careful how we, on the money giving side, how we worked collectively when we are preparing these monies to be given out. So rather than making damage or duplicating, we have to be very strategic, and we should take it very professionally and carefully about how we define these elements of the roadmap. I think it's of course, it's a bottom-up approach, it's a top-down approach, but the ones holding the money have even more responsibility for the results. So that's my point. And very final point, I'm going to be very brief. What happened in my country, they tend to regulate too early. Mm-hmm. They would put in laws which would make our life even more difficult. From the good intentions, of course, to protect us. But from my experience, if you don't have to regulate, if you can only focus on the roadmap for now, and then maybe in a year or two from now, see what needs to be regulated. Don't do the other way around.
Excellent. Francis, let me share with you, is it only the foundations, regulators, and the NGOs only, or there are other partners or mediators can play a role in putting like a roadmap for social investment?
I think in terms of a new trend or a new movement on 2030 agenda, I would say there are 3 stages. Phase 1, 1/3 of them might be piloting, building a lot of different experiments. A second phase might be ecosystem building. The third one is finding the right institutions to scaling, to build the scale So I think it's, but I think especially for the first 2 stages, I think having intermediaries is very important. So we ourselves is one of the example. 10 years ago in Hong Kong, no one gets to know what is social enterprise, no one gets to know what is social investing. So by that time we play a role. Apart from the money flow, which is the deal flow sometimes we call, I think there are important to taking aware of 3 other flows as well. First is the people flow. Whether we have the right people, as Martin said, they have some kind of feeling about the problems. They know how to get the problems to become solutions. So secondly, I think would be the capital in a way that is not just about money, it's about land sometimes, it's about network, connections with business people maybe. So that's another capital flow. The third one would be idea flow. How can we really get more ideas? Some of them are not mature, but I think we have to get more ideas on the table. So I think with these, I think intermediary play a good role in connecting all these different flows together. So I think in general, I think for any big mega plan, we dream big, keep on thinking about it, but start small. But I think one more thing is we go deep. So I think especially at the piloting stage, the intermediary has to get the role in comparing note. There might be a lot of failings, but how to learn from the failing, educate different people from different sectors together is very important for the early stage.
Excellent. I think with Norbert, I want to discuss with you the capacity building side in terms of the human capital and also the knowledge we need to build actually and get it ready for a long journey in social investment. How do you see that?
First, I think it's a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity for Saudi Arabia that it's an open field, a fresh field. There are no structures existing, or not so many structures existing. If you compare it with Germany, I told it yesterday that we have a tradition of about 100 years, and when we went in with this development of this 4th sector, like Soran told it about social entrepreneurship, we had competitors. And we had a lot of people who said, we don't need this. So now you have a fresh field, and it's much easier to develop structures in the fresh fields than if you come in an already existing market. Second point that I think is also very important is don't build up so many regulations, like Soran also said. If you build up regulations, you will narrowing the market and the opportunities. The third point is let the people make the decision what is important, not the government and not the foundations. It's some things is very hard to make this decision because people need, or non-profit organization at least, they need fundings and income to develop their own companies and their organization. That's, of course, is necessary, but other side to get a better understanding about the needs and the chances in this non-profit market, the best way is to talk with people and let the people make the decision. Fourth point, Francis already said, is to build up in sector capacities, you need intermediate bodies because people who are trying to build up a non-profit organization, they have to develop specific needs. It's not specific competences because it's not the same competence like in the business. They are broader. We got this example from Soran. He said, if you work in a traditional business, you have an orientation on numbers, on money. But if you work in a non-profit organization, your orientation is on values and impact. So it's much more complex than a normal business because you have goals, different goals, not only one goal. You have to fulfill different goals, and sometimes the goals in one company are in conflict with other goals in the same company. So it's much more complex to develop and to lead a non-profit organization than a business organization. And for this, you need specific competence. And to improve this competence, you need intermediate bodies where the people can really learn what is the specific of a non-profit organization, how I can lead a non-profit organization, how I can fund a non-profit organization, how I can mix different kinds of income, like business income. If you have a broader non-profit organization, you have own income streams, but sometimes you have to mix it with foundation, you have to mix it with corporate social responsibility. So that's a complex system. If you will build up this complex system, you have to develop this, to improve the competences in this field. Then I think the next point, which is very important, is to think in a crossover system. It's not only the non-profit sector as an isolated model on the one sector. Then, like we have heard it yesterday and today, all of speakers had the same opinion. We have to think in a crossover. We have to involve business. We have to involve the political sector in the development processes, because we can solve the problems of the world better if we work together. So there are different aspects.
Excellent. Let me conclude this part of the discussion with a question, and any one of you can answer it if you want, but we'd like to go to the next section. Do you think we need like a critical mass of knowledge and capacity in terms of human capital to have a successful social investment? It's very clear that we cannot make a big jumps basically without having like the basic knowledge, the basic principles established and very well disseminated in our organizations before going to strategic directions like social investment. Do you think we do have like a critical mass of knowledge and human capital for social investment before going for strategic steps? Any one of you, so.
I would say definitely yes, you need a critical mass, but not only on knowledge, but also on a critical mass on non-profit organization.
Okay.
Even if you would say we are not in a competition field, but a specific kind of competition you need also in the non-profit sector, otherwise you don't improve your services. If you don't have competition, even in this field, you don't develop the processes. For this reason, you need a critical mass to develop the whole sector.
Exactly.
I agree, and would just add, I mean, both things go hand in hand. It's like chicken and egg, both have to progress together, and that makes it more challenging as well. Because it needs a certain thinking in society to set in as well for this sector to take off. And one thing which is a particular challenge for Islamic societies, Islamic countries, which perhaps the center here could do some research on, is zakat. So zakat is part of our religion, and often people feel I've given my zakat and my duty is over. And how do we use that? So there is a lot of philanthropy, immense amounts that takes place in Islamic countries, Islamic societies. But how do you use that to make it as effective, as efficient, as responsive to needs of the population as we can? And it's not so perhaps as an idea that the center here could do some thinking, research in it, collaborate with other centers around the Islamic world and non-Islamic world to come up with ideas for the 21st century, how we can use zakat most effectively to meet the needs of our societies.
Excellent. So, Zoran, please. Yeah.
Yes, I think it would be the most ideal scenario that you have enough critical knowledge, but you have a 2030 vision and you don't have much time. So what I have, probably we are the most similar country to you from all of these countries represented here, because we went through this process just a couple of years ago. And what happened is that international consultants would come to get a general opinion on the fourth sector, on the social enterprise, social business sector. And they would gather everybody from the non-profit to talk about social investment, And then what they will come up is a document which really is based on consensus of people who know little about the topic. So what I'm trying to say is that even though we don't have the critical knowledge, I'm sure in the kingdom you have 50, 500 people who are very knowledgeable in this place, in this sector. And it's probably a moment to start with them, and then to gradually educate everybody else and try to bring the general consensus and more knowledge into the room. And I think that is, in your situation, most probably I would say the most preferred scenario, because you have to build from what you have, but don't build a consensus with people who don't have that experience. You know, rather work with people from outside that have that experience.
Excellent. I can share with you a personal experience last month where I saw in San Francisco, where I met some young boys and girls in high schools, and each one of them has his own NPO at that time. And it was surprising to me that the elite school in the US nowadays are not looking only for grades or high scores in exams or even volunteering. They are looking for social initiatives, people who can do social initiatives and make this like an admission criteria to the elite schools in the US. So it was kind of surprising, and being in a country that is more than 70% of the population are young people, it is a big challenge for us as practitioners in the nonprofit sector to provide them the services and enable them, encourage them to do a social good. So let me now...
I can share this experience.
Yes, please.
We have a shift in our mindset in the world, I would say. For example, in my company 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when we looked for employees, it was very, very hard to get an employee because the social sector was not really attractive for them. The people, young people, when they came from the university, they want to start in a bank as investment banker to get very fast much money. Right. Now it changed, so we don't have any problem to get an employee now. When we make and call for a job, we get hundreds of people, even in Germany where it's very hard to get qualified people because we have no unemployment. We have hundreds of people who want to work in the social impact because they are committed to the social sector or to social purposes. So we have a mind shift, and I think that's great that we have this.
Just to add one more thing, I'm sorry. One more thing to add is in terms of the critical mass and mind shift changing. You know, I can speak for the Muslim community in the United States. You know, working in the nonprofit sector or working in a social enterprise, you know, people think that you're doing, you know, miskeen work or charitable work, and it's non-professional, and you're not making enough money to survive, and it's looked down upon. And so, you know, we've started a movement there where we're driving a mind shift change to say, hey, you need to have purposeful living and be professionally purposeful, and to professionalize the sector so that people, or youth especially, they can live successfully, professionally in the social good sector. So that's the critical mass you really need, is not to just go out there and say, let's develop talent, people who are really good at entrepreneurship or really good at, you know, HR or business, for example, and let's bring that into socially conscious work. That's not going to be enough. They're going to have models and personas that they love, and the critical mass is the families are also encouraging their children to not just go be an engineer and work in oil and gas, but get a master's in philanthropy or a master's in social entrepreneurship and a PhD in social entrepreneurship and go work in these foundations and this entire sector to grow it all together.
Excellent. I think you took us one step further in the second part, where we're going to shift the scope basically to the NGOs and the individuals who would like really to initiate like a social investment project. And we're gonna discuss this from different aspects. I would like to go back to Martin. To be practical, we used to address a certain social challenge by convincing a donor to give us the money, and we jump immediately to the target segment and try to do projects without basically giving enough time to design and engineer the service that we would like to provide. How do you see that?
I think that one thing that we need to do is to professionalize and train nonprofit organizations to understand the impact of their work and what they want to achieve. What Zoran was mentioning, very good. Sometimes this can create a lot of damage. You can do a lot of bad things to the population of Saudi Arabia if you go around and doing the wrong type of aid. When you work with very poor people and you give them money, you are also transmitting, or you run the risk of transmitting the message, you are not good. You are weak. You are not intelligent. I will give you this. So by every dollar that you give, you take away $1 of dignity. And you also create a mentality of dependence. And this is a very negative, vicious circle, whereby the more you help the population, the weaker the population is. They say, give me more, give me more, give me more. And so all of a sudden, you started with good intentions, but you have an angry population that does not do anything for self-help, but is requiring more and more. There are countries that have been destroyed by government welfare systems and by wrong philanthropy. So you have to be very careful how to give the right incentives and to give assistance that will empower and not assistance that will weaken. So people, you know, the oath that medical doctors say, above all, do not harm. If you're in the nonprofit sector, be very careful not to create more problems than good. So many innocent, naive, big-hearted people just go and, I'm just going and help. No. Think, read. So this is the first thing, no hurt. And also, what is the right incentive? And so people need to think, and I think that the universities have to be a place where case studies are done in order for students and professionals to go into the sector in a very good way. Are there people who cannot help themselves? Are there people who can help themselves? You know, because of course, if you give a person a fish, they will eat for one day. And if you teach people to fish, they will eat for a lifetime. You have to be very careful, and so this is my main thing. And of course, education. There are many people in the government that know nothing about social investment. They need to be educated also, and also people in the business community. So it is a very a big challenge, but a very beautiful challenge. He was mentioning the Aravind Eye Hospital. In India, the Aravind Eye Hospital is the biggest hospital in the world. And it is a very interesting combination of people that go there for free, people that go to that pay. It It is an interesting architecture of financing.
Excellent. Let me go back to you, Tayyib. I know there is another side of you, you did not show up yet, which is the youth work. What do you want to say to the NGOs and the young Saudis? How you think we can inspire them and enable them to start their own social initiatives and to be a social entrepreneur?
So yeah, youth work is definitely close to my heart because it was through youth work that even I transformed. You know, there's two things that you just simply cannot teach in a classroom. You can't teach it in a classroom. Number one is that passion and care. And number two is the characteristic of being risk-taking. And you know, to do social good work, you have to care. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would tell me, "Tayyib, take out the garbage." And if I got up and I'm like, ugh, she would say, "Stop, I'll take it out." And I asked her one day, I said, "Mom, why do you make me stop when I'm doing a task?" She said, "Because I look at you, and if I tell you don't care, you'll do it wrong. You'll mess it up. But if I ask you to do something and you do it like you care, you will do it correctly without me showing you." So that's number one, is that if we're gonna try to work with youth, you can't teach someone how to care in a classroom. You gotta go out and engage them in the experience. Number two, risk-taking. You know, the difference between, I had a mentor one time say, "Tayyib, you know what the difference is between a businessman and an entrepreneur?" I said, "What?" He goes, "A businessman does not take risk. They calculate everything on a spreadsheet." He said, "Entrepreneurs, you know, they can jump off cliffs and build a plane or at least a parachute before they hit the ground and crash." That's entrepreneurship, and you can't teach risk aversion and risk taking. You can't teach risk taking in class. So that's something that you build through experiences. So that's my big lesson. Yes, you need to have classwork. You need to have trainers. You need to have mentorship programs, but design transformational experiences at the earliest age possible and carry them through till they're enabled and empowered and ready to go. That would be my one advice.
Excellent. So this is your message to the NGOs, how to give a space to the youth, enable them, be patient, and bear and host their risk, basically. Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't go sequentially. So maybe, Zoran, if you would like to share with us how the NGOs and the individuals, basically, in your experience, how did you see the social investment goes in the NGOs and by individuals?
Just to build on what Tayyib said, when we talk about, giving people hope and transformational experiences, I think at the essence of that, and we talk about this relationship, and you will probably, and if you look at the vision 2030, and you look at this collectively doing things, transparency is very important. So we built up this quite sophisticated system, which is IT and physical systems in the back, where we engage governments, we engage citizens, and we engage foundations together to help young people create. And that will be one of the experiences that they engage and help an old place or fix something, or help children, or help elderly people, or bring up infrastructure, or help do some sports. I think this is really important for you to know, that if you decide to fund these kind of things, that you have to make sure that it's very transparent. Because if you give that money in a very transparent way, which is visible online, of course, then you are building trust, which is again what we're talking about here. because we have to make sure we are building trust, and only if we are building trust from the first moment on, when people know what the money is going for, when people know who's using the money, when people know that nobody's stealing the money, then we can have a fruitful conversation between the citizens and the NGOs, and also between the NGOs and those giving the money. So in today's world, we can no longer see everything so separated as we used to do. I think now if you use digital solutions to bring everybody to one place, and I think engineers are really good people to talk to because they can engineer this. And we are good people to talk to because we can build your own capacity in your own NGOs to do this. And we can bring experiences from around the world to help you do this. Because you, my brothers and sisters, you are now standing before an opportunity to really earn your way to God, to heaven and to paradise. And I think only by being professional, transparent, and everything we said today here, we can actually do that.
Excellent. I see, Farouk, but let me just put a point here. If we are now classical NGOs, right, and we would like to move towards smart giving and to start a kind of a social investment, what do you think the ecosystem we should have within the organizations and for the individuals to start their own initiatives?
So it is actually difficult, and from our own experience, because the kind of individuals that you need and the skill set that you need are probably the most difficult to assemble, because you need, as was being mentioned by Tayyib, you need people who care, who are passionate, who are willing to take risk. At the same time, you need people who who must have good investing skill sets. They must be willing to take less compensation than what they might get in banks. So, and it's not easy, people have their own personal imperatives, they have family lives. So, in a traditional NGO, the skill sets may be slightly simpler, but when you get to this third sector, impact investing, the skill sets get more complex. And as you were mentioning, 10, 15 years ago, it was very difficult to get people into this sector. Now there is a lot more interest. And I think with the new generation coming up, that is continuing certainly. I mean, we get, again, a very large number of applications for any role that opens up. But it is not easy. It is very difficult work. And it's, my own personal background is from mainstream financial sector, and I thought when I started getting involved with Acumen, I've done so many big deals and everything, and this will be easy. It's much harder, much harder than the work I was doing in the mainstream financial sector. But I'd just like to add to what Zoran was also saying, we are at a unique point in history. If you look at technology, the immense creation of wealth, the focus on philanthropy, it never used to be this way. So we have an opportunity, perhaps for the first time, to really try and solve the most difficult problems faced by humanity. And we have a real opportunity to be able to solve them. But it requires really the whole society to go behind it, because at the same time, we haven't really touched upon climate change, etc., but we have massive challenges coming up, and they are not 50 years from now, they are in the next decade. In fact, they are already started. So how do we pull everything that God Almighty has given us to make sure that humanity continues in a safe and progressive manner?
Excellent. Let me go to Norbert regarding the capacity building inside the NGOs to have a good experience in social investment. What kind of capacity do we need within the organizations, basically, to go for this journey?
I think we get a really good explanation from Zoran before, he made this roadmap from input, activity, output, outcome, impact. I think inside a non-profit organization, you have to have a clear understanding what is your goal, or what you will achieve with your work, and you make it clear with your investors, impact investors, or with your foundation. When we start a business, or when we start a social project, a social business, and we get any funding from investor or from a foundation, at the beginning we call it an action map. We do an action map where we made it really clear what are the input, what we expect as outcomes, and what are our impact goals. So, and that is like our measurement model. It's a measurement model where we try to get a commitment with our investor, that we can, after maybe 1, 2, or 3 years, we can say, okay, that was our goal, and that we reached in this 2 or 3 years. So make it transparent for your investor, that what kind of goals and what number of goals you will really reach, so you get a commitment and you can convince your investor. And I think that's very important. And for this, you have to learn a lot about impact measurement models, which already existing.
Okay. The question is now, as an NGO, we heard about social investment, impact investment, responsible investment, and so on. Is it enough to have an idea about the social investment in an event like this, and then go do things ourselves, or we really need like a professional intermediate who can really help the organizations in launching in the social investment? In other words, is it possible to do this ourselves in the organizations, or we need like a supporting services? Let me have an input from Francis on this, please.
I'm still thinking that right now is the piloting stage. It's very difficult to say a model, we should do this or do that. I think, I don't know why, suddenly we will have some new change makers, new minds coming out. We need to work on bravely on some cases. Cases is important, and the early adopters, the role models. I think, to me, social investing or social entrepreneurship or social innovation is a set of philosophy. It's a second chance for us to see the problem again. So I think if any one of us here, no matter we are nonprofit or not, let's forget about our identity first. Let's go back to the people, the impact. Always go back to that. Don't invest for the sake of investing. Don't invent for the sake of inventing. But I think it's all because of the new perspective, seeing the problem. Why profit and purpose together? Because we want better sustainability. The old way is not working. So I think it's right now the right time for us to disrupt the perspective. I think it's number one. And then we need some outliers. Try to build up some cases. And without cases, never be an ecosystem, never be a culture. But if you got a culture, you got an ecosystem, the rest is easy, I would say. So I think 3 things, echoing with Martin's strong point pointing to that. First is people. Second is people. Third is people. It's always people.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was really inspiring. I have basically a lot of questions coming because you help the people to think more about the topic, and they get really interesting questions. But I saw that so many inputs is around the challenge that how the people gonna perceive or understand your new behavior as a social investor in the NGO. There is a worry that most of the people in the community are gonna see you as a competitor to the private sector. Once you start providing services and products to the society, they're gonna compare you to the private sector. How to manage this transition from perceiving you as a charity and then now as a social investor? Please.
There are, in principle, three sectors: government, business, and the social sector. Before, it was considered that business would produce goods and services, and that government would produce services for the people. Because these two sectors did not solve all the problems, is that the social sector was born. Sometimes the social sector is to show the government how to do it. Sometimes the social sector is to show the business how to do it. And sometimes it is to create a new world. You can take any area. It could be early childhood education, or it could be the provision of eyeglasses or hearing aids. It doesn't matter. What we have to avoid is for there to be an unjust competition, where you create a social sector that hurts the business sector. And all of a sudden, the business sector that is selling eyeglasses cannot compete because you have a subsidy there. You know, so we have to also make a list of the unfair competition that the social sector can create. The good news is that there is room for everybody. There is room for government early childhood education, and there is also for future early childhood education that government teachers still don't understand. So the world is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the role of the social sector many times is to bring to the attention of the population that children can also go to school before they go to school. So there are many opportunities there, but there are also risks of distortions that you have to take care, because or else you will have conflict and inefficiency.
Excellent. There is another question regarding the funding organizations or the foundations here in Saudi Arabia. Normally, they set up like strategic directions for their funds and open the opportunity to give proposals for projects and then give the funds. Now, the question is, do you really want the foundations to run the show themselves and bring the NGOs as a partners, so they are the one architecting the service to the people, or still subcontracting, quote unquote, the service to the NGO, and they do it their own way? So there is two styles now in funding. Either you build a partnership, you bring them to your house, okay, to work on your goals with you, or you just push the task to them, give them all the money, and let them find their way. Any input, please, from you guys? Yes, please.
I can give an example from my country. Since after the war, we had many different organizations, funding organizations. Since the war, we have had many funding organizations. And what usually happens is that because they have the money, they all plan their activities without talking to each other. At the same time, they require the fund receiving organizations to partner. And I think this is a very unfair situation in which, you know, the fund recipients are now, because where is the responsibility for Vision 2030? Who is responsible if 2030 vision fails? Who is responsible? Well, we are all responsible in different ways, and that's why I think that from the funding side, foundations and the government and whoever's providing money, they have to be very strategic. They have to talk to each other. They have to define these roadmaps that milestones, and then invite recipient organizations as partners to see in which of the areas they're going to specialize. Because when you are specializing, you are becoming much more professional, and then it can lead and go as a partnership rather than all of us doing our own thing. So I think the responsibility, if I could reinvent my country and go back 15 years, I would tell all the funding organizations, before you publish your call for proposal, make sure that your other foundation is not publishing the same call for proposal, and then another one is publishing the same call for proposal. And remember the ladder analogy? And then we have 3 ladders, 3 bars in the same place, and then there's a huge gap somewhere else. So funding organizations have to communicate and cooperate more, and then of course we on the recipient side have to do that as well. So because we are all responsible together.
Exactly. I think we all agree that if we continue solving the social challenge the classical way we used to, we're gonna sometime enlarge the problem more than solving the problem. So we have to work smart. We have to work in a collaborative way. So in the literature nowadays, there is a lot of write-up about having a social innovation process that's give you a new way of handling things, and then take that innovative idea or innovative approach to a social entrepreneurship, test it in a limited environment. Once it is successful, then I can take it and scale it up to a social enterprise. It is still not clear for us as how is the fundamental difference between the social enterprise, for example, Tayyib started, and the classical NGO. Could you please shed some light on that?
Well, the process, I mean, Norbert, go ahead.
Oh, no.
You know, the framework that I use is the EEIE framework, which is explore, experiment, institutionalize, and exploit. This is the framework that we use. You know, when I think about classical, for me, you know, a nonprofit or for-profit, that's just an IRS designation. And that designation is to clarify, you know, what happens to the money that gets left over. You know, but what matters to me is the mission of that organization. But for me, like if I'm in nonprofit startup or for-profit startup, I'm using the same business principles of entrepreneurship as a process to build that organization. Just throwing this in as 2 cents. Earlier you asked about the NGOs that are sort of taking that jump to looking at social investment. You know, my advice to you would be, you know, be very clear about your core competency as an organization, and don't try to do too much. Because if you try to do too much, if you try to go after anything and everything, then you risk your core you risk your core business falling apart. And that's from some of the conversations that I'm having with some of you. You've been doing something a certain way for a very, very long time, and now you see other opportunities or funding or foundations or calls for proposals, and you're trying to get into these other ways. You're risking your core competency from falling apart from behind you. I don't know if that was helpful or.
Yes, please.
Probably we can make it very easy. If you make a competition between a startup and a business, you would say the startup is someone who is producing a new product and new services, and the business is already existing. 5 years later, so 10 years later, a startup is also a business. So if he is successful. If you could look on the social side, you will have the same. You have a social startup who is developing a social innovation, and he is trying to bring this social innovation into the market or into the public. If he is successful, he will be a social enterprise 5 years later, will be a charity 5 years later. So that's a process. So we could have also social innovation inside the NGO, of course, but if it's outside the NGO and some new players on the field, they are a part on the development process from the non-profit sector.
Okay, let me get some input from Farouk regarding the market image of the social enterprise or the social investment. So most of the financial institutions gonna look to you as an investor basically, but with some long-term social impact, right? So are you okay with that, for people to see you, or for your market image to be really like an investor at the first place? Or how do you see building the market image of the social investment?
No, to be honest, no. We would not be happy with that image. And we often get asked that question. So how much return that you make? And that is the wrong question. The question is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And investment for us is a means. It's not an end in itself. And that is important, and that is what I think makes us and many other social investment organizations and social entrepreneurs different. So investment is a means, it is not an end. And there are issues and problems that we are focused on to try and solve. And yes, if you solve them successfully, like Delight, you will make some money also eventually. But if they started off by just trying to make money, they would have never solved the problem of providing energy to people, poor people who are off the grid. So in that sense, the earlier question that you asked, is there competition between the social sector and the business? Yes, at margins somewhere, if there are subsidies and all, they can be. But frankly, there isn't, because if business was meeting the needs of the poor, we wouldn't need to do this work.
Right.
There are 2-3 billion people whose needs are not being met by business, and hence we need to do this work and create business models that recognize the poor as customers and meet their needs.
Very nice. There is a question regarding protecting the social investment. And let me ask you, Francis, regarding the governance, the role of governance in protecting the social investment. How do you see that?
You mean governance, right?
Yes.
I think it's very important to, I think one of the gentlemen said, I think it's, if you overmeasure, it's not a good thing. So I think the right metrics, and then always, as all the panelists say, always the impact first. So like I've called in examples that I yesterday talked about, the light home, the affordable housing. So we don't easily just take the measure of how many homes, how many families being benefited to be the only metrics, although that already has proven something. So through the journey, we invent our own metrics. For example, at the end of the day, at most people can live there for 3 years. But right now, the average living time is actually 2 years for all those 400 families. So that's a good proof of how we can get people exit the poverty. That's a more important metrics. So the landlord, how many of them will continue the contract? Because normally they sign 3 years, 5 years. How many of them will continue? Right now it's 80%. So that along the journey we find out is the engagement is good. So that becomes a new matrix of us. So if right from the beginning we just see the financial return or just some of the easy metrics to be the only thing to guide it, we miss out a lot of things. So I think at first, all those investors, no matter grant, loan, or equity, we treat them as partner. Sometimes we engage, get them to talk to the poor people, get them feel it. And then at the end of the day, all the landlord or investors become our co-workers. So we work out these metrics together. At the end of the day, if we don't submit report, after bringing these people, the landlord investors, go to the field, they can feel it. They can see the faces are happy. Oh, I know that you don't need to submit report. I know the impact is there. I think it's the people connections through this process. The journey itself is an impact to us.
Okay. Let me just have a final word from you guys on exactly about protecting the social investment, because most of the people are seeing now a vague road, and they are hesitant basically to start this journey because they are afraid of the high risk and the lack of governance between different layers. So if you would like to give like a closing a remark on this. Tayyib, you have something on this, please.
Yes, so protecting social investment, you know, two pieces of advice, you know, connecting the two ideas. One is make sure you have a governance system that gives power to the right people that are going to achieve the mission. And second, make sure that the right people that are going to achieve the mission care, are empowered, and have ownership of bringing that idea to life.
Let me just clear this. By putting a correct governance, does it mean that I write down how things should be run and what is the right and responsibility for each party, or shall we like give this to like a professional who can put like a governance document for the organization? Is this something internally we can do? Is this an internal exercise?
Well, it's a collaborative exercise for sure. You know, so I can give you an example of the consequence of poor governance. Just recently, I was working with an organization in the United States. They asked me to be an interim CEO. And it was a very old, long-standing organization. And this organization claims to be representing all Muslims in the United States. So I'm the interim CEO. And this organization has a national conference every year. And a board member, a very long-standing senior board member, called me and he said, Tayyib, at this year's convention, I want you to have a Democratic Party debate. And I said to him, I said, my dear brother, inshallah, will consider that. I'm looking for governance policy that guides me, the CEO, on how to implement this recommendation, and I find nothing. Because the question in my mind was, if the organization is claiming to represent all Muslims in America, are all Muslims in America Democratic? Or could some Muslims be Republican as well? Turns out that the Muslims are split between Democratic and Republican Party. So governance guides decision making, right? That's number one. That's the whole value of it. How you create governance is collaborative. It's part and parcel. The board members, part and parcel, yes, you can have facilitators and consultants that can come and help you, and part and parcel of it is looking at the ground, what's happening now, and part of it is looking at the sky, which is where are we going, and it's a process, but invest in the process of having a good governance system.
Excellent. Please.
What's going to happen in Saudi Arabia is happening everywhere in the world. You have a very long arch of pure charities to social enterprises that produce goods and services in competition with the private sector. And you will have different types of governance challenges. And when you want to help children that need wheelchairs, you will have one type of organization. When you want to create libraries in every single school in Saudi Arabia, you will have a different type of organizations. And when you want to provide laptops for every child in Saudi Arabia, you will have a different type of organizations. The laptop giving organizations will or will not work with Apple or... So what you need to have is meetings like this in order to talk about the challenges. You know, for example, there will be times when the establishment will reject social organizations. I was mentioning yesterday that when this social entrepreneur wanted to provide eyeglasses to the poor, the establishment doctor said no. And he convinced them to open up. So right now we have a lot of need and a status quo. So social entrepreneurs are the ones that convince the government or convince the business sector to open up, and so it's going to be impossible to predictate, but do not shackle the socials, the new sector. Open up and see what type of challenges are happening, because it has to do with tradition, it has to be how ready the government is, how ready the business sector is, religious leaders, it's all there. So let the system grow and take note.
Can I have 30 seconds?
Yes, let me
okay.
come to Zoran and then
Okay,
back to you,
all right,
Francis.
right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Just
Come to you.
let me give you an example, and that's a actually really deep question you're asking, and it's also about ecosystem. There is an organization in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, that they take care of young men and women who are mentally disabled. These young people have absolutely no access. You know, they struggle with education, they finish whatever they can, and then they are at home all the time. So what they do, they bring them to our workshops. And we went and spoke to them and said, can we make a business? Can we make a business so these disabled people who otherwise would be staying at home, and when the parents die, who knows what happens to them, can we make a business and employ these people with disabilities? And they said, yes, we have an idea. We would like to create micro vegetable in a greenhouse, kind of LED lights, a very high-tech facility, and we're going to bring these disabled people there, and they're going to produce that. A year after, now we are employing over 10 people. It's just the beginning, 10 people. We have a small greenhouse. We have all this equipment there. And turn out that these people with disabilities, because they are so happy that they have a job, that they take care of these little plants much better than people without disabilities, and that the percentage of success of the plant is almost 100%, because they really take care of each plant, compared to regular people without disabilities, where it's 80%. So now the question, how do you protect that kind of investment? And the way, that's why I was thinking deep. So the way to protect them is manifold, and we spoke about governance and documents. But another one is that you cannot leave them alone after you make the investment. We opened up, we have many contacts, opened up the leading supermarket chain, and now they're selling to that. This was the biggest help they could get. We spoke to another impact investor who gave them additional funding to buy the equipment. We're helping them manage the AHR, and we have an accounting agency which is helping them do accounting in our country. So protecting your investment is about caring and thinking with them, how can we make sure that the purpose of the business, and going back also, what's the purpose, what's the social business, they produce goods and they sell it in the supermarkets, and they are competition to other companies, but their purpose is much deeper, and they actually, you know, it's a mission we would like to protect, and to be able to protect that kind of investment is about being able to think big and help them with elements where they're actually struggling.
I would like to borrow a Chinese idiom. So it says water can float a boat, but at the same time, water can also sink a boat. I'll compare water to what we talked about, the investment or the business. So I think when we are applying new tools, it's very important for us to always remind it's guided by the impact or purpose. So whatever tools we consider, don't be over-fascinated about all these tools, and don't be too rushed on that. But I think most important is going back why we are doing all these things. So impact-driven should always keep in mind, because we see a lot of failure cases with social investing, bad experiences. After all, capital way, the current way is why we are coming up with a lot of problems right now. So I think when we are applying all these jungles and these terminology, jargons, and all these tools, we have to be super conscious about this.
I think I would say that two quick points that have come up in terms of governance. The most basic thing is for the founder, the board, the CEO to be willing to give up their power. If you don't have that mindset, because what governance does, it guides your decision making. It puts a constraint on your power to do anything that you want. That today you feel like having a democratic debate, tomorrow you feel like having a Republican debate, whatever. So you have to be willing to give up power yourself for the long-term good of the organization. So ego has to go away from it when you are trying to develop a governance structure. You only have to look at how it will help achieve your objectives most effectively in the long term. I think the second point, which we've been discussing throughout this, and it's very important to have roadmaps to learn from global best practices, see how they are applicable within your own context. But in the end, I would also say that start and let the work teach you. That's very important also. Analysis paralysis should not hold back, because even in mainstream entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, 95% of the business plan that you start with are completely different by the time the company is successful. Exactly. So you will start thinking in one thing, and real life will take you somewhere else, but it'll move you towards your goal.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the entire, the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us are CEOs, and as soon as Brother Farouk said start and let the work teach you, every single one of us smiled. That should tell you something.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is a very nice concluding remark. I would like to thank you, all of you, and all the participants also for their patience. I think we have a very nice talk in this forum, and we enjoyed having all of you with us. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your dedication and patience, and for all the load we have been putting as a scientific committee on you guys in making this a success. I think we really enjoyed having you around here. We enjoyed every word we discussed with you and all the input you gave to us. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the organizing committee have a little surprises for you. So I ask Dr. Hattan to distribute it, please.
That is so beautiful.
Start with Tayyip, please.
No, this is amazing.
Amazing.
It's Aladdin.
Aladdin is in there.
Let's make a wish.
I have to take Zamzam back. My dad wants yours.
شكرا لكم جميعا، شكرا لجامعة الملك فهد للبترول والمعادن، شكرا للمؤسسات المانحة الشريكة في هذا النجاح، شكرا لكم جميعا. ولاستكمال حلقات النقاش وفعاليات المنتدى نلتقيكم وأنتم بخير في أكاديمية الفوزان لنبدأ معكم في تمام الساعة 3 مساء بعد وجبة الغداء وأنتم بخير وعافية. العبق الفارح وحاسة الكلمة مدونان في بطاقة الإلهام. أنني كنت معكم بالتقديم عبد اللطيف الدليجان، وفي أمان الله.
buy the coffee. So lunch is served now, so please, it's our lunch and then we can
ثلاثة